All right, class, we have a few minutes delay. We have a little technical difficulty, and Nathan's working on it, and he went to get another laptop. So it'll be just a few more minutes, so talk amongst yourselves.
It's always a good group when they can joke.
And you know several people in here, I see. Okay, well, this morning, I'm very happy to introduce Michelle Erpenbach. Michelle is president of Sioux Falls Thrive, the workforce development cradle to create community initiative founded in 2017 by the Sioux Falls Chamber of Developmental Foundation, Sioux Empire United Way, and the Community Foundation. Thrive action teams bring together a broad range of organizations to collaborate in tackling the difficult issues of food insecurity, out-of-school time, and affordable housing as they relate to the children in our community. Michelle is a longtime community advocate and communications professional who served 2 years on the Sioux Falls City Council. So we welcome Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Yep, you can. So awesome to be here with you. I do recognize several faces, and I want to recognize that among those partnerships that Sally talked about is First Presbyterian Church. You are one of those groups that is coming to the table to strategize and explore new options for things that are happening with our kids in our community. So I want to just do some data with you real quick. As Sally noted, Thrive became an actual organization in 2017. We started as a concept in 2014 with a citywide process planning project called Sioux Falls Tomorrow. There were 2,500, 2,600 people involved with that process, and they came down to several of the things that you've seen as outcomes in the community over the last decade or so. Thrive was one of them because of this concept of income disparity. That group came to that idea of our kids are failing in a lot of ways, because our incomes are so different in this community. One of the quotes that came out of that is, as income disparity grows, pressures on families increase, making it harder to engage them in their children's education and negatively impacting student success. So it was after that Forward Sioux Falls and the organizations that we talked about, the United Way, Development Foundation, Community Foundation, and Chamber of Commerce came together and they went, we got to figure out this cradle to career piece that came out of Sioux Falls Tomorrow, and how do we essentially grow our own workforce. Those of you that have been around for a while, remember the days when Governor Janklow and Governor Perpich would argue over, we'd fight over who can we steal from Minnesota, who can they steal from South Dakota. We can't do that anymore. It doesn't work that way. And we have fewer and fewer families coming from the rural areas to Sioux Falls. More and more of our families are immigrant, refugee, and folks from other areas. And more and more of them tend to be lower income. And so Sioux Falls Thrive became part of that strategic workforce agenda. One of the statistics that we looked at was those poverty stats. When you look at this particular graph, you'll see that 32%, and this is a little bit old on data, I think it would probably post-pandemic be a little bit more than that, 32% of the children in Sioux Falls schools classify as low income or super low income, 32%. And we're at a point now where 48%, 49% of our kids are on free or reduced lunches across the community of Sioux Falls. And then the other one this one bugs me. This one we just updated last year or 2 years ago now with the 2020 census. This chart looks exactly the same as it did in 2016 when we first did the data on this. If you look at the bars on the right-hand side, that's really kind of you and me. It is the higher income folks in the community. It is those folks that are doing well. And those bars, from the time we did this before until this one, those bars have grown. The bars on the left side show those folks that are in those neighborhoods that are low income and super low income. The size of those bars hasn't changed. But if you pay attention to the news, you know that our population in Sioux Falls has grown dramatically. And so when we talk about, I'm not a math professional, but you talk about percentages, if your pie is bigger, your wedge is going to represent more people, right? And so that's what's happening with we have increasing income equality or inequality. Then briefly look at this graph talks about where our total enrollment is for our schools. How many of those kids are, if you look at the free and reduced, there are 8 title schools. We have 8 neighborhood title schools. They're Title I schools, free and reduced. Lunch price families are larger numbers of their families are free or reduced lunch. Those 8 title schools are on the left column, that sort of middle column. You'll see 82% free and reduced lunch, 70% average attendance. Those schools tend to be 2/3 of the students identify as non-white, other nationalities. And then look at the column on the far right, where 86% average attendant, 68% of our total enrollment right now. Free and reduced numbers are way down. Those schools tend to be more than 75% white. And then when we look at, I know this one's a little bit hard to see. This is a Google map, but if you look at those blue pins, they're all north of 18th Street. Those are those 8 neighborhood title elementary schools. They're all north of 18th Street. We're a dramatically divided community when it comes to race and economy. Yes. Then the next one I want to look at then is, this is when the organizations that started Thrive started talking about cradle to career, this is what they talked about. Is a child ready for kindergarten? Can a child read at the 3rd grade level when they're in 3rd grade? Can they do 8th grade math when they're in 8th grade? We look at those 3 indicators. They're children who are not falling into those categories at the levels that you want them to be, 75% more likely to not graduate from high school. So 75% less likely to graduate from high school if they don't hit those first 3 indicators. So Cradle to Careers became that buzzword for us because we have to figure out how to get those kids to the point where they can graduate and go on to be our future workforce. And so one of the things that we've discovered, and I was raised by public school teachers, and I don't know why it took me this long to figure this out, but children only spend about 20% of their lives in a classroom. The other 80% of their lives are spent outside the classroom, out in the world, out in the ecosystem. They're at home, they're maybe not at home, they're maybe running the streets in their neighborhood 80% of the time. And so we have to figure out as a community, how do we work in that ecosystem for those kids? And that's where Thrive's mission comes in. Really our goal, and I know that you're hearing me differently depending on where I move my head, our goal really is to make sure every kid in this community can achieve the same, they have the same potential as any other child in the community. And it really is about growing our own workforce. So we do a lot, everything that Thrive does is based on research. We're looking at 3 key areas. We do, as noted earlier, affordable housing, out of school time, and food security. And food security tends to be where we end up hanging our hat on a lot of issues. If you're interested in that research that everything we do is based on, it's all on our website at siouxfallsthrive.org. The top of the page, there's a resources button and all kinds of great reports. We're in partnership with Augustana Research Institute, and they do all of those surveys for us. And it's kind of fascinating and kind of depressing at the same time in a lot of cases, right? So I want to talk just a little bit about some of our outcomes, and then we'll talk a little bit how we got there. When we talk about affordable housing, and the model that we follow is called collective impact. And so essentially, we bring folks like you, and John and Pastor Pat are both involved in a project that we're working on right now, coming together to sit at a table and go, okay, how can we figure this out? We have issues with XYZ. In this case, we're going to talk about affordable housing for a minute. We'll bring together those housing experts in the community and talk through where are the gaps, where are the issues, where are the concerns that really do affect children in our community. So some of the outcomes that have happened from this, one is a project called One Roof. It went through a pilot project for a couple of years and now lives on its own in the community outreach organization. What it does is bring services around those families that are the hardest to keep housed. So maybe dad's been in prison, mom might be addicted. There are just needs for extra help in keeping them stably housed. And so One Roof is a really great example of that. Another one that we just let go at the beginning of the year, and we're going to kind of do some press on it, is called the Housing Retention Specialist. This person has been in a pilot project at East River Legal Services, and it's been so successful. In the first year alone, there were 9 children that were kept from being evicted because of their family situations. And I just was looking through her annual report just this week, and we're at 60, I think she said 65 kids and 60 adults that she prevented from being evicted by essentially coming alongside those folks. Again, it's if you don't have the experience or your life is such that paying rent is one of the most difficult things you can do, sometimes you need somebody to just come alongside and say, hey, here's some solutions. Let's walk together through this. And so the goal with that particular project with the Housing Retention Specialist was that concept of keeping children stably housed. It now is no longer in a pilot phase. It's actually living at East River Legal Services, and there are several other organizations that are going to take on that same role, put it into their organizations, so that their focus is on stably housing kids. Then the housing screening tool is one that I can't call it a great win at this point. It's one of those things that, when you're strategizing, you're thinking through things, and this sounds like a really great plan. Eventually we'll get to that point where I always use the church secretary as an example, and that the people that are in your administrative office in this building during the work week, there are people that walk in sometimes and go, I'm being evicted, I need a gas card, I need this, whatever it is. And it's difficult for that person who doesn't have those experiences it's difficult for them to go, oh, I can hook you up with whatever program for housing. And so that screening tool is in pilot phase with figuring out how can we make that easier for those folks that are kind of boots on the ground, those first responders almost, when it comes to meeting with folks who are struggling. And then the final thing that we're working on, and actually the big thing, the thing that you will hear the most about in the next several months, is called a Housing Trust Fund. It is a new concept in Sioux Falls, but is being activated across the country. There's about 800 housing trust funds in the United States right now. They essentially, when it comes to, if you're a housing developer and you want to build apartments or low-income housing, essentially, for folks whose income is in that, we can talk numbers and all of those things. I just say the super poor, the least and the lost in our community. In order to make that apartment affordable, a developer has to pull together some bank loans, and they've got to do some tax increment financing, and they also have to find a way to fill that last gap. And in South Dakota, that doesn't really exist. There are some funds here and there, but they have to get to that point if they're going to make it affordable for the lowest of our income levels. They almost need, and we've started, it's free money essentially. They have to have that kind of flexibility and local control over those dollars so that they can make that affordable. They essentially buy down the rent with that housing trust fund. And so the Housing Action Team from Sioux Falls Thrive is tackling that and has been working on it for several months now, and is in the stage now where we have a national consultant working with us, and we're getting ready we'll write an ordinance for the city of Sioux Falls in terms of how do we make that work in Sioux Falls, and how can we continue to make that a sustainable fund with public dollars, and then leverage those public dollars to not only maybe go after state and federal dollars, but then look at the philanthropic community as well. But we have to get to the point in Sioux Falls, and this is the philosophy and the attitude of the Housing Action Team, we have to get to a point in Sioux Falls where we no longer have children sleeping in cars. When we first started talking about the Housing Trust Fund, one of the first things I always do with folks is, why are we here? And what's our goal statement? And one of the first lines out of their mouths at that point was, I don't want any more children sleeping in cars in Sioux Falls. So the Housing Trust Fund is a key word that you'll want to kind of keep track of. You'll start hearing about it probably in the next several months. I think we're going to end up at City Council in April, whether we like it or not. Food security is a huge piece, as I said. We've done a lot of interesting outcomes when it comes to food security. You've heard over, especially the last year, a little bit more than a year, and nothing against any sort of organization in Sioux Falls, but one of our major grocery stores closed one of its locations in a lower income area in Sioux Falls just a year ago now. And that really brought to our minds as a community the concept of a food desert. And there are a couple of different ways to measure a food desert, but the way that Thrive looks at it is through the USDA model. It's less than a mile from your home to a grocery store that provides the level of food that a basic levels of food that a family would need. And so by doing that, the community saw a dramatic increase in the size of our food deserts in Sioux Falls. And that then brought home to this group that we've got outcomes that include, and I've got the wrong slide, sorry. Outcomes that include the mobile food pantries that are available with Feeding South Dakota. That all came out of our Food Security Action Team. Excuse me. And we've done some outreach in some critical neighborhoods. You've heard a little bit about a project called KidLink that really started with food security and now is working in the Laura B. Anderson neighborhood and in the Terry Redlin Elementary neighborhood, both based on that concept of food insecurity in neighborhoods that are critically in need. And then, so then the group updated its original report, because we did a report in 2016, 2018, and after that store closed, I apologize, I'm starting to lose my voice. After that store closed, they went in and redid that survey so that we could see, and we literally, Augie Research is amazing, they did an interactive map for us so that we could click that store, excuse me, click that store. When the store is open, it looks like this. when the store is closed, the desert gets huge. And so that really made this team start to talk about, what are we about in the future? We have some really great outcomes, these things that we've done. What other things can we do, and how can we look to the future in solving that issue, or at least taking a chunk out of that issue for our community? And so, excuse me, really tweaking the messaging and working with the city of Sioux Falls. They have a project called Eat Well Sioux Falls that really they have a food policy council that has been defunct during the pandemic. And we're at a point where one of my big things is, I don't want to do the same things that everyone else is doing. If someone is already working on solving an issue, I'm not going to step into that space. But if we can share that space, if we can come together and work collaboratively, that's really the Thrive model, is to figure out how can we all work together on that issue. And so we are working with the city, bringing that sort of defunct food policy council in under the food security action team with Sioux Falls Thrive, and starting to work together on some very specific goals. One of the key goals is, excuse me, reducing the distance between those folks who are in need of food and those folks who are producing it. So you're going to see some interesting things coming out of that conversation as well, but right now we're in that, I'll call it the strategizing phase. We really do spend a lot of time at a table going, they're doing this over here, and they're doing this over here. Can we make those work together, and can we make them work better? It's really taking a hold of those existing resources that we have and making them more efficient, and getting them to the people who really are in need of those issues and of those solutions. And so that's really a big piece of what we're doing. Then out of school enrichment is the other area where we're working. We're doing a lot of, you'll see Thrive working a lot with childcare right now. Apologize, I'm hoping this cough drop catches up with me in a minute. So you hear us talking a lot about Sioux Falls Child Care Collaborative. That group is about 60 or 65 individual providers and organizations that provide childcare in this community. The reason that childcare is an issue that Thrive is willing to tackle is because it is a workforce issue. One, if you're a working parent with children and who aren't in school during the day, and even that after school period of time, if you don't have care for those children, you can't be in the workforce. You have to figure out how to care for those children, and getting a job is not necessarily an option. So that's a piece of it. And then those children are, again, our future workforce. And so Thrive has taken a hold of that, and working with that Sioux Falls Child Care Collaborative, they have taken, there's a $50,000 grant that they're working with right now that is using, doing what we're calling the Sioux Falls Community Child Care Initiative. Two consultants are working with them now and working through a business plan for employers especially it's almost an accreditation to become a family-friendly employer in this community. You know, if you can tick off, there are various policies that company has available for employees, those sorts of things. You'll start to see all of that come together, because the 6 months is up in April, and so we're kind of going, we'll have a blueprint and all sorts of things that people will be able to see. But childcare, and when it comes to that out of school time, we're also working with those children who are, we call them disconnected. And particularly if you're a former educator or your parent, I look at my kids and go, there were times when they weren't necessarily connected to school. They maybe weren't involved with after school activities, maybe didn't have a job. Those kids can fall through the cracks very easily. And so one of our collaboratives, the Youth Development Collaborative, is working on doing some really in-depth research with those kids. How can we reach those kids? And then how can we provide for them the things that will stimulate their minds and reconnect them to the community, to their family, to their schools, and again, bring them back into that possibility, into that pipeline of being future workforce. So they're all really exciting things, lots of things that we've got going in that way. I want to talk then just briefly about how do we get from, again, if you can imagine these tables full of people, and John's in one of those groups right now where we're kind of pounding our heads against the wall once in a while, where you're going, again, why are we here? What issue are we trying to solve? How do we get from that point to where we're actually making a difference in the community? So our best example is really comes from that food insecurity piece. And in 2019, the Thrive Board and the Food Security Action Team said, we need to figure out some quick wins. We do a lot of strategizing. We do a lot of things that people don't know a lot about. Let's go into a neighborhood and prove that we can do this. Take that collective impact model. Take that idea of making those resources more available, more efficient for folks. Take that into a neighborhood and prove it. And so that's what started the project that's known as KidLink. And that's the organization, Thrive, hired me at that time to, they said, we've got some money, we got a grant to do this. Let's take this food security thing into a neighborhood, and they pointed out the neighborhood based on the survey. It's the Laura B. Anderson area. If you think about where Smithfield is right now and go to the east, Rice is there and Cliff Avenue, go up in that corner. There's a little neighborhood school up there called Laura B. Anderson. Fabulous little neighborhood, very enclosed. It's for those of you that have been around for a while, it's called Riverside. And they are proud of their community, and they are people that are living in that neighborhood who are living in the homes that their grandparents built. And it's an amazing place to be. But the school has always kind of felt left behind. They don't have a community center, they don't have a library. And so we went into that area and learned very quickly that that school has 60% of those children that attend that school, 60% of them coming on buses. And so we look at that top of the Cliff Avenue Hill, the Cliff and Benson area, huge part of their attendance area is up there. And then there's a pretty significant trailer park out kind of by Great Bear on Rice Avenue, or on Rice Street. 95% of the people that live in that particular neighborhood, English is their second language, and they're mostly Hispanic. And so we've learned all kinds of things. And of course, KidLink started right at the same time as COVID. And so it was an interesting place to be, one, as a person in a new job, and two, as an organization creating something out of nothing. But we average more than 200 volunteers, various organizations, school staff, parents, involved in this project in various different ways. We have funding for 3 neighborhoods, and so we stayed at LBA for an extended period of time, partly because of the pandemic and because we were learning so much from building from nothing. And now we, this fall, opened at Terry Redlin. Really what it does is it expands their out-of-school time programming, and it has created then a Tuesday night family night that not only provides opportunities for kids, extra tutoring, extra activities, those kinds of things, and fun, but it also provides opportunities for their parents. So as we kind of continue to dream now that it really is a prototype now for the school district, you'll hear about the model called the Community Learning Center. KidLink is the prototype for that. It will be open in each of the elementary schools, all 24 elementary schools starting this next school year. That concept of how does a school, it feels really old school. It feels like the neighborhood I grew up in, right? If there were things happening in town, they were at the school. If my parents were in a situation where, and this is kind of the next dream, if my parents were in a situation where they needed to maybe take a class, maybe they need to get their GED, they should be able to do that right there in their own neighborhood. Because one of the biggest issues in this community is transportation. And I continue to watch, and I said early on, I spent 8 years on the city council, and we spent a lot of time in that concept of public transportation doesn't work in this community. It doesn't get to those neighborhoods where folks really need it. And if it does, you can spend all day taking your kid to a doctor's appointment if your only transportation is a bus. And so we have to overcome that in some ways by taking those services to the neighborhood And so that's that community learning center model. That's the KidLink model that really is going to change the way that Sioux Falls schools provide services for their children. So what's next for what's happening with Thrive? As I said, Housing Trust Fund, we're going to continue development of that. We're looking really hard at that child care crisis. We spent some time in Pierre last week. We're doing there will be, we hope, a summer study with the legislature, but I'm not sure that the entire answer is in sort of state funding. It really is going to come from this community. It's really going to come from the support of employers and figuring out how is it that Sioux Falls, we do everything better than everyone else. Why can't we do childcare better than everyone else? So you're going to see those conversations continue throughout this next several months. And then we're going to continue to look at those two really critical barriers in Sioux Falls. As I said, transportation is one, communications is the other. It's a tough slog to reach those families when we know that in the Sioux Falls School District there's at least 29 different languages being spoken in the homes of children in the school district. We have to figure out how do we communicate with those folks. And we have to figure out how do you communicate that those activities are happening in an easy access place like their school. And so communications and transportation are huge. So then my final and then I'd love to answer any questions that you have. There's lots of ways that you can help. As I said, we've kind of tapped Pastor Pat, and John's jumping into a project with us. If there are things that are on your mind or your heart when you talk about food insecurity and out of school time and affordable housing, if there's things that are on your mind, jump on our website, SiouxFallsThrive.org, and click the volunteer button. One of the great things that is available, and we're always looking for creative brains that are willing to hang out with kids for an hour, is that KidLink Tuesday nights. It's crazy. It's very similar to Bible school when I was in Bible school. Very low budget, little tables around. There's lots of glitter and glue, but there's math problems behind the glitter and glue. You'll always make some kind of snack, and that very often involves geometry and science, and maybe you're cooking something. There are all sorts of links to literature, science, math, and well-being throughout the KidLink process. So if you decide that's maybe some way that you want to jump in with Thrive, you're always welcome. One of the great ways that you can help Thrive is to talk to people about it. If you're having coffee with somebody and something comes up, especially when you start to hear things that are happening in the legislature, mention Thrive. Out of school time, food security, affordable housing. You're going to hear those things coming out of the legislature for the entire 40 days that they're in session this year. Talk about it with folks. You can certainly follow Sioux Falls Thrive on social media. We're on both Facebook and LinkedIn. There's always crazy stuff going on there. And then I'd also invite you to watch for opportunities to join an action team. That there are things that will be happening when we start talking strategically again about some of these in-depth things, especially when we're bringing together these 2 and maybe 3 food-related groups, our Food Security Action Team, the city's Food Policy Council, and the city's Urban Ag Coalition. There's going to be some times when we're going to go, we need more brains at this table. So there's always going to be opportunities for that, and we'll shoot those out on social media when they're available. And then I would invite you to consider contribution. Thrive is privately funded. I'm always writing grants and visiting with people asking about funding. You can always jump on our website and hit the donate button. We do run all of our funding through the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, so if you write them a check, put Thrive in the memo, they'll make sure that we get credited for it. But really what we need as a community, what Thrive needs from you most of all, is that spirit of collaboration and that spirit of let's work this out together. As I said before, Sioux Falls does everything better than everyone else. Let's do this for our kids better than everyone else. So I'm happy to answer questions. If there's anything that I can add clarity to, yeah, go ahead.
I always have a question why employees, especially our big banks, whatever, don't provide childcare. Is it because of the workforce? There's no people? I mean, isn't some of the responsibility, if you want employees, you've got to provide childcare.
Right.
It makes no sense to me.
Right, and think about it. If you've lived in Sioux Falls any period of time, you know that Citibank used to have its own childcare. and Sioux Valley Hospital, before it was Sanford, had their own child care as well. They also now, and no disparagement against organizations in town, they're doing the best that they can. I know that Sanford is buying seats in another organization, so they're providing some. First Interstate Bank is doing a little bit as well, but only because now we've started to talk about it more. For so long, childcare has been, and we'll still hear it from some of our policymakers across this conservative state, we will still hear policymakers say, you chose to have those children, you figure out what to do with them. Moms should be at home with their kids. And so but that goes completely against, if you look at the data in South Dakota, 95% of parents, both parents, 95% of them in South Dakota are in the workforce. And we still have more help wanted signs out there. And so we have to figure out exactly. But to your point, the hole is in workforce right now. And part of that issue is the concept that we feel like, and we'll say it even, oh, well, you know, I drop my kids at the babysitter before I go to work. No, these people are not babysitters. They are professional childcare providers who are educating. Remember our cradle to career, that 0 to 5 time frame in a person's life is where the most development happens. You're not dropping your child to sit in front of a TV screen all day with a babysitter. You're dropping them in an educational facility. You're leaving them in the care of educators who will prepare them for kindergarten and for the rest of the world. And so it's part of it is that we don't treat those childcare providers as professionals. And so it's difficult, especially if I can go make tacos at a fast food joint for 20 bucks an hour, or I can go work with kids and change diapers for 12 bucks an hour. Pretty tough, right? So we've got some hurdles to get over. But there are organizations that, to their credit, are going, okay, can we figure this out? And maybe it is we build our own, we figure out how to do our own, or maybe it is that we buy into, fund some seats for our own employees' childcare. Yeah, back here.
My question is, just a second.
Does the expansion of Medicaid in South Dakota help at all with income levels so that some of that money is paid for by Medicaid, medical bills are paid for by Medicaid as compared to using their salary, which is limited anyway?
Mm-hmm. I hope that's true. And I know that that politically we tend to struggle in South Dakota with that idea of Medicaid, that if you're capable of working, then you don't need government help. But we also live in a state where, again, you can get paid 20 bucks an hour to make tacos, and we can't figure out how to fund those childcare providers for more than about $12 or $15 an hour. So yes, absolutely. If we do Medicaid expansion the right way, it will have an impact on those lower income families, particularly those children that thrive and you all are most concerned about. Other questions?
So I have a two-parter.
Okay.
If I was a person, not me in particular, but if I was a person who needed assistance, would I know where to go to get that assistance for, like, if I was being evicted, or I assume many of the kids probably interact at school, but if I was an adult and I needed assistance, where would I go? And the second question is, I know some schools have like a community garden program, and that kind of helps kids learn about nutrition, and maybe that, I don't know if that would help with the food desert, but maybe that would help with some of the Title I schools, just having that garden if they have the facility available.
I should have brought a sign-up sheet to pass around because I need volunteers that think like that, right? The answer to your first question is no. That if I'm, and I run into these folks all the time because one, Thrive doesn't technically provide programming, but I spend a lot of time on Tuesday nights in elementary school gyms because that's where we're demonstrating those initiatives, right? I've run into families who are at their wits' end and they don't know. And so that's one of those keys is if we're going to do that community learning center model, is that the example that I keep using with them is if you have the community learning center model and there's what we're role modeling is a connections person, like a community coordinator in that school. We have that as part of the pilot project. If that person is sitting there waiting as the buses are unloaded or as moms are dropping off kids, and the community coordinator sees a mom walk in with a black eye that she didn't have the day before, that connector person can say, because she's somebody they know, right? The connector person is part of their community. That person can say, you know what, I've got some information, this might be helpful to you, without being embarrassing, but because I'm your friend, I can step in. And if, and this one's a true story, if a third grader comes to their teacher and says, you know what, on Friday, we're gonna go live in the Union Gospel Mission, that teacher will have information that can go home with that kid so that they can find the food resources they need, they can find clothing resources that they might have, but we have to get back to that idea that not everybody knows. I mean, if I weren't in the business that I'm in, I wouldn't have any clue what's the first thing to do. And so then I would add on to that, because I know that you wonder, if you were to somehow come across someone like that, and I would encourage you to think about people in your own congregation as being potentially in crisis. You're gonna know, you're gonna see that there are things happening in people's families. 211 is your source. Call 211. Have them call 211. But if that's a struggle for them, it's okay to call for them and say, hey, I know so-and-so, I need some help with, they need to connect with food. 211 is gonna help you make those connections. Then to answer your question about community gardens, the Food Security Action Team is actually jumping into that. I didn't want too many slides. I wanted to be able to talk as much as we could and answer questions. One of the pieces of their new sort of goal statements is that concept, as I said, of reducing the space between the people who are eating the food and the people that are producing the food. And one of those things is community gardens. And Kathy and I were talking earlier about how Master Gardeners have been involved with community gardens around town for since 2000, actually. And more agencies have built them. But we need to get to the point where it's a normal thing at a school too. And so that's going to be one of those thought processes that comes out of that Urban Ag Coalition that is coming in under that Food Security Action Team, is how do we, one, because the other piece of it is that you can't just come into a neighborhood and say, okay, here's your garden, you're gonna grow tomatoes and zucchini, and we're gonna have some corn over here. You have to come in and go, hey, you know what, I'll help you dig this up if you wanna grow some of the vegetables that you like. What do you like? Maybe it's kale. We talk about kale a lot. Kale is not a favorite. But maybe it is kale. Maybe somebody wants to grow kale. But come in as a partnership and build trusting relationships in neighborhoods. And then, that's the thing about KidLink, is that build those relationships and then get out of the way. So that becomes an empowering situation for those neighbors. That if they want to be involved with that, and we're learning that, we're doing it at LBA. It's a science teacher has got some raised beds there, and we've kind of been messing around with that because several of us do like to garden, but we have to get to that point where we're backing out again. Because I don't live there. I claim it because I'm there a lot, but I don't live there, and I don't go to do the day-to-day in that world. And so we got to figure out in each neighborhood, how do we build those new leaders, but we come in as gardeners and friends. And build those relationships. So yeah, that's a piece of it, you bet. Yep. Other questions, thoughts? I don't know. Well, it's been awesome hanging out with you. I appreciate the invitation. I'll hang out here for a few minutes and answer questions if you have anything else you want to chat about. Again, SiouxFallsThrive.org is where you'll learn more detail about all, because we do a lot of different things. And there are times I have a board meeting on Wednesday and they always kind of go, wait a minute, now you're doing what? Because there are so many things. But I always talk to my staff, and we're a very small staff, but I always talk to them about how we're claiming that place of being kind of the pot stirrers in the community. We've been asked to be in this position that has been difficult for anyone else to be a part of, and I'm grateful that the community has said, we need somebody to figure out how to make it better for these kids, and that they're allowing me to come in, and so I call us the pot stirrers. Yeah, Kathy?
I have one question.
Yeah.
And I heard this from, of course, friends, like pickleball or, I don't know, PEO or something. Anyway, there's a congregation that does soccer at Laura B. Anderson.
Yeah.
And how did that come about?
It's called the Neighborhood Soccer League. And that's what happens when, as a community, we allow people to think broadly, right? And so Sioux Falls Thrive had been in the LBA neighborhood we'd been up there, I think, a year and a half by that point. And some of you know Randall Beck used to be at the Argus Leader, and he is at Oak Hills. And so each school has a faith partner, and I should have looked it up, but you all have a school that you're faith partner with. Oak Hills is the one for LBA. And so Randall has a mentee there, and he's got a couple new ones now. He tells this story about this kid at Laura B. Anderson that was just the soccer king. But because he lives in the Riverside neighborhood, he can't get to Yankton Trails. My God, it's like 10 miles, right? And there's no car, and whatever, right? So Randall starts dreaming as he's watching us building KidLink around, and Randall starts coming to our stuff, and he's hanging out with kids, and he goes, why can't we have soccer in this neighborhood? And so it was Randall Beck. I will give him all of the credit. We just kind of we stirred his pot a little bit, and he took off with it. And he now has, I can't remember if it's 6 schools that have the Neighborhood Soccer League now. And they had a championship up at the Sanford complex this spring, and of course LBA won. So, but it's that concept again of there's a little park in that neighborhood that those families can walk to, and they will go there. And the first time, the first day that they opened up, 75 children were on that soccer field in this little tiny park. And their families come. And they bring their breakfast or whatever. And then now the way that it's set up is that there are volunteers from the church and whoever else in the neighborhood come in, coach. There were dads coaching. I know they didn't know anything about soccer, but they were coaching. And then there's a bunch of folks that get together and there's lunch. So that they start at 9 in the morning or whatever it is. And by 10:30, 11 o'clock, kids are lining up to get hot dogs and chips and whatever. And it's just fun. But they get their own shirt that says, LBA soccer and all of the things. They end the season with, they get their own soccer ball to take home so they can practice. And they're doing it, I think they're doing 2 seasons a year, so it's 6 or 7 weeks. It's Saturday mornings. And it's one of those things that we can do these things for our kids if we just step up and say we're going to. And he started really at LBA, and by the time he did his next season, he had 4 schools, and now, like I said, there's 6 or 8. And it's amazing. And it's changing the way those kids see the world. So I think that's the other piece that we have to understand is that many of these kids, there's maybe only 1 or 2 adults in their lives. And then there's that teacher that is a key person in their life. They need to see and feel the effects of other adults in their lives. They need to understand that there are people in the community around them that care for them. And all it is literally an hour, a couple hours for soccer, and whether you know soccer or not, hanging around chatting with families. It's that concept of loving on children that aren't our own. And that's what community's about. And that soccer thing is cool. It's really, really cool. So, yeah. KidLink is too. It's really fun. The thing that we do with KidLink is we all wear these obnoxious green T-shirts. And so everyone knows, the kids know that the green T-shirt people are safe and friendly. They don't necessarily know our names all the time. We try to wear name tags and whatever, but they know that we're safe and they know that we love them. And it's just, it's influential. You know that. You see that in the work that you do with your community and your church. If someone knows that you love them, it changes their life view. There you go. That's your sermon for the day. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Michelle. There's some really good things going on. I want to remind everybody that next week we're going to hear from 3 different men in the Sioux Falls community that work for Sioux Falls that are going to tell about the homeless veterans' tiny houses, and that's going to be real interesting to hear about. So come back.